Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, March 20th, 2023. You should have in front of you voting list number 18. We have 5 bills on the voting list, and that is not representative of the number of calls, texts, and emails that I got from our colleagues over the weekend. But we're going to go ahead and ask staff to walk us through the 5 bills that we have before us, and we can talk about them and then learn what you'd like to do with them. So we're going to start with David. Okay, good morning. Thank you.
Okay, the first bill on your list is House or Senate bill. Okay, Senate Bill 387, which is a task force to study reducing emergency department wait times. You have a reprint in front of you, so we'll just go straight to the reprint. And the sponsor has offered amendments to the Senate bill to make it the same, almost the same as the House bill that is on third reader in the House today. So if we can look at the reprint, the House had made several changes to the bill, but I'll point out where the sponsor wants to go beyond those changes. If you'll see at the front that says no change to what the name of the task force, but you'll see a new number 2. The task force shall establish accountability and a timetable for completing its activities. That's added by the sponsor. There are changes in the membership of the task force, which you can see as you go through this page and then the next unnumbered page. After all these changes, there's going to be 21 members on the task force. If you go to page on the bottom of the page, you'll see the House had put in there just two general members from the public. The House Senate sponsor is suggesting that they be replaced with one representative. This is a misspelling, ARP, and one representative from the NAACP. So that's a difference than the House. And then if you go to page 2 of actually number 2 of 2 of the reprint.
No.
Okay, you'll see at the top that instead of the Department of Health, the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services has agreed to staff the task force. So it will be them who are going to put this thing together. And some of the task force duties have been changed by the House. You'll see identify root causes of wait times in emergency departments, including these factors as which are added by, and the Senate sponsor is going along with that also. The only difference here between the Senate and the House bill that the Senate sponsor wants to offer is 5 and 6 at the bottom of the page are reversed. So the senators wanted to number 5 to be, which is number 6 in the House, and 6 is number 5 in the House. So those are some of the changes there also. And otherwise, this bill, her suggestions are we make it the same as the Senate bill with those differences.
Okay, you have before you Senate Bill 387 reprint. Let's have some discussion. Vice Chair.
Well, since I don't think there's been any discussion amongst us, I know Senator Bidle had been working on getting people on the task force or off the task force. And since we have not had any discussions, just the House, and I guess the senator who has the bill, I'm somewhat concerned of 21 people being on this task force because they're going to be pulling from all different ways. And I know that I think upcoming in the next year or so is CMS. The CMS is going to be looking at our rate system and the way we do things here in the state. I just wonder if maybe the hospital and some of the other health organizations might be on the task force. And do we need a bill? And you might just want to write a strong letter of request, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I thought Senator Bidle.
Thank you. I actually wasn't trying to add or subtract Senator Klaasmeyer. I just did a spreadsheet of all the people that requested. No, and I was trying to work with the House, and I didn't get a return phone call or email or anything. So I didn't really work on it other than gathering up people that had commented during the hearing. So but I do want to say I agree with Senator Glassmeyer. I think this needs a little more discussion.
Okay. Are there any other discussion from members on the reprint of Senate Bill 387 that we have before us? Senator Lamb.
Yeah, I mean, appreciate the vice chair's kind of comments and thoughts on that. I also have some concern with just the number of people on the task force. I've served on task force or commissions where there have been a lot of members and a lot of stakeholders together. Sometimes that's helpful. Sometimes, and then probably more oftentimes, it's been really challenging being able to come to a conclusion or actually having something substantive as a work product come out of a task force or commission, because nobody really wants to take the initiative when there's 21 people involved. Everyone kind of points in the direction of other folks. You know, so that does give me some pause, I guess, to the vice chair's suggestion of a letter that would seemingly give a little bit more flexibility as to who may be willing to serve on this task force, or who, you know, the interested stakeholders would be willing to come forward and serve on this if there was some kind of a task force that doesn't enumerate the specific members in statute itself.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Guile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with the comments. It seems to me like there are maybe a little bit too many cooks in the kitchen, and maybe a little crowded to get some things done. And I would agree that perhaps, you know, a letter from the committee may be more fruitful here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm agnostic about like the construction of the task force and stuff like that. The bottom line for me is there is a problem with wait times in an emergency room. And I think the vice chair offered a very reasonable suggestion in that it should be addressed in somehow. And so if that is the will of this committee or the chair see fit, I would definitely support that. But something needs to be done about the amount. The emergency room is not an emergency these days in the state of Maryland. And so I would love to see some type of effort or movement towards the larger goal of what this bill hopes to address.
Thank you. And I would concur with that. Probably one of the most common concerns that I've heard from constituents around healthcare over the past year has been related to hospital wait times. I know you all are hearing it in your district. It is a priority. It's something that absolutely has to be addressed. What I'm hearing from the committee is we're not sure that this vehicle is the best way to address it. And I wasn't sure, Madam Vice Chair, when you spoke about the letter, do we have a thought about who the letter should be directed to and how we might proceed with that?
I would think to the main people that are on here, the Hospital Association, and some of the other health coordinated committees that deal with our healthcare. There's a couple of them, the H ones.
Okay, let me call the health commissions. Okay, let me go to Senator Hershey. Senator Hershey.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess if that's the direction that this is going towards, a letter, I would just, again, want to make sure that we are very specific in that. I think there are a lot of good parts of this bill that need to be transferred over. And I think one of them, I remember we identified in the hearing, was really looking at some of what is called as root causes here, why there's so many backups at the emergency rooms. And I think it was also important, I think my colleague, he probably just got his light on to mention it, but you know, what the EMT vehicles are going through as well too. And those individuals, them getting to the emergency room, the time that they have to wait there as well too, before they can get back out on the roads again. So I just want to make sure that if we go forward with the letter, that it's inclusive of all of the things that we talked about. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Mounts.
The senator spoke very well on my behalf. As always.
Okay, Senator Lamb.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think if the will of the committee is to go forward with a letter, I think one additional point to the points that were brought up by Senator Hayes and Senator Hershey is to take a holistic view of what those root causes are. That the emergency department is just one part of a long pipeline of how patients enter into the hospital and leave the hospital. And it's a constriction point, but there are other pieces that play into why so many people come into the emergency departments, right? Maybe they don't have a primary care provider, so they're using the emergency department as their primary care provider. For people that are leaving the emergency department, it could be that there are not enough psych beds. It could be that there are just not enough beds in general in the hospital for them to be admitted. And so they're being housed in the emergency department until more beds open up. So, encourage as part of the charge in the letter that's being, that would be developed, to encourage that there be a holistic view to this, that it's the emergency department can be part of the problem, but it's probably not the only part of the problem there when you look at how patients come into the emergency department and leave.
No, I think that's a good point. I know in Prince George's County, we've been having conversations about points in the healthcare continuum where there needs to be some intervention, if you will, to try to expedite care. We've talked about what happens in urgent care and whether or not our community is even aware of the urgent care facilities and how they operate. We know a certain percentage are because they're using them, but I think there are implications for all of the providers on the healthcare continuum that contribute as well. So it sounds like, based on the vice chair's recommendation and the conversation from the members, the desire is to hold this bill and ask council to draft a letter that we will try to get out this week for the committee to review, to make sure it captures the will of the committee as we go forward. Does that sound good? All right. Okay, so we'll go to the next bill. Thank you, David.
Okay, the next bill is Senate Bill 509. It was held over from last week. There was some apparently the subcommittee over in the House was going to take action, and then they withheld action. So groups got together and had compromise amendments, which you have in a reprint in front of you. And if you recall, as introduced, the bill would require the Maryland Healthcare Commission, when evaluating a notice of acquisition or transfer of interest of a nursing home, to provide written findings and recommendations to the Office of Healthcare Quality, which is the group that licenses nursing facilities in the state. The findings and recommendations must include quality ratings of facilities currently or previously owned by the purchaser, the tax ID number of each purchaser, the Personal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services certification number, and a summary of the findings and basis for the recommendations. The OHCQ would consider these recommendations when they take action either to approve, deny, approve with conditions, or revoke a nursing home license. The reprint in front of you is not quite the same as you had before you the other day. And these include the compromise amendments from all the parties who have interest in this bill. If you go to page 2, you'll see that there was additional things that the commission would have to consider in making their recommendation to OHCQ. This language in the middle here is from the Attorney General's office, the HEAU. This was also, there's no change here. This was also in the first reprint you had last week. What is different is MHCC had amendments that would have altered the CON requirements for nursing homes. Those are no longer in here. And instead, there is a study on page 4 of the reprint that would require the Maryland Healthcare Commission, in consulting with other folks, Medicaid, Office of Healthcare Quality, nursing homes, et cetera, to study and make recommendations on the number of patient rooms with more than 2 beds and other possible changes to CON for nursing facilities. And I believe this bill, as amended, is moving through the House.
Senator Bidle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is another really important bill. And as I've had loved ones in nursing homes and assisted living constantly over the last few years, I know how important this is. My one concern, David, if you can just confirm with me, by having the tax ID number, that's great, but so often these organizations set up a different LLC or corporation for each unit they're buying, so they'd all have different tax IDs. Is there anything we can do to look at their organization as a whole and not just at one nursing home that they're buying? I don't know if I'm very clear on what I'm trying to say, but you know, each company they set up has a new tax ID. Can be.
I guess this was in the bills introduced about the tax ID. Quality ratings or facilities currently or previously owned within or outside the state. So I guess the idea is to get all the possible facilities that this group, they would have to report this information. And if they're obviously if they're not reporting that information to the commission, then. So I don't know how.
You don't know how to get to that,
I don't know how to get any further.
the
than that.
umbrella group. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion on Senate Bill 509 as amended before us this morning? I'll entertain a motion. Okay. Have a motion and a second for a favorable on Senate Bill 509 as amended on the reprint before us. Seeing no questions, all in favor, raise your hand. Okay, that bill receives a unanimous favorable report as amended. We'll move to the next bill.
The next bill is Senate Bill 644. There are no reprints because there are no amendments offered. It requires that a local maternal mortality review team on request of the team's chair and as necessary to carry out the team's purpose and duties be provided immediate access to information and records, including information on prenatal care maintained by a healthcare provider regarding a woman whose death is being reviewed by the local team. So the difference here is it just specifies more about the circumstances of why this case is before the local team. And instead of just access, it says immediate access to this information for them to do their job.
Madam Vice Chair.
Who are the local teams? What do you mean by that?
Local teams were established in statute several years ago, and their purpose is to review information records regarding the death of mothers. And
Okay, all right, okay, so they've been around.
oh yeah, these teams have been around. I believe only Baltimore City actually has a review team in place. Well, there's several types of review teams.
Okay, are there any additional questions on Senate Bill 644? Okay, I'll entertain a motion. Have a motion and a second for a favorable on Senate Bill 644. Are there any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your hand. You're okay. So that bill receives a unanimous favorable report.
City wants this bill.
Okay. I think, David, that's your last bill before us this morning. Thank you very much. We'll go to Patrick's bills.
Next on the voting list is Senate Bill 515. This is the bill that requires health insurance carriers to establish a process for requesting an exception to a step therapy or fail first protocol for a prescription drug. An exception request must be granted under certain circumstances, such as if the step therapy drug is likely contraindicated or will likely cause an adverse reaction to the insured, or if the insured tried the drug already and it was ineffective and discontinued by the prescriber. So before you have a reprint. This reprint reflects amendments that were adopted by the House, and I'll walk you through what they've done. On page 3 of the reprint, this amendment would strike a provision that would prohibit step therapy or fail first protocol if the prescription drug is used to treat a mental disorder or a condition. And then if you go to page 4, there is a requirement here. There's a change in the circumstances in which step therapy exception requests must be granted. So it's limited to whether the step therapy drug is contraindicated or will likely cause an adverse reaction. And it doesn't include physical harm or mental harm to the insured. So it would be limited to those circumstances where there it may be harmful to the patient because of some related medical condition or symptoms that would be associated with the use of the drug. There was a provision in here that would have established a separate appeal process for a denial of an exception request, and this strikes that provision and makes that appeal of an exception denial subject to the general law in statute that governs appeals. On page 5, there's some language here that makes clear that in granting an exception, this authorizes coverage for the prescription drug ordered. It also makes clear that the bill doesn't require the granting of the bill doesn't require a carrier to provide coverage for a drug that is not covered under a policy. And then there's a prohibition that's been brought into the bill on the bottom of page 5 that would prohibit a carrier from requiring more than one prior authorization if 2 or more tablets of different dosage strengths are prescribed at the same time as part of a treatment plan. These would be drugs that are made by the same manufacturer. So for example, if a patient needs 30 milligrams, but the drug manufacturer only has 10 and 20 milligram pills, they could prescribe those at the same time to meet the required dosage. And you would only have one prior authorization process for that. And so then on page, the second to the last page of the reprint, as I mentioned, it would make a denial subject to the standard process of review that's in statute. But it does specify here that if a step therapy exception request is submitted electronically, there are some expedited timelines for a carrier to make a determination on that request. So these were the amendments that have been adopted by the House, and I think the sponsor of Senator Lamb is offering them.
Okay, we'll go to Senator Guile first.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So prescription drugs for mental health disorders, that's excluded from this, correct?
So there was, in the bill as introduced, it would have excluded those drugs from a step therapy or fail first protocol. It's my understanding that there were some concerns about carving out a class of drugs to treat a particular type of condition, but that this is something that is going to be looked at in a broader conversation about utilization review over the interim.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if Senator Lamb has any. That's fine. Go ahead.
Senator Lamb.
Thank you. It sounds like
I know.
I've been requested to hit my button. So and I appreciate Senator Giles' point in bringing that piece up. It does give me pause to remove psych meds from this. I don't want to slow down the bill. So, I want to be clear about that. But, the removal of the psych meds does give me some concern in that psychiatric conditions are very different than sometimes physical or somatic conditions. And to put patients through failure of psychiatric drugs, there's risk there, there's danger to others there's risk of harm to the patient themselves. When psychiatric drugs that we know work for a patient should be able to be continued without having to go through fail first kind of therapy. Obviously, that provision's been removed here. I'm not going to fight that, but it does give me some concern there. It sounds like the House is actually going to be, submitting a letter from the committee to look at some of those issues, including the psychiatric medications during the interim. You know, if the chair is open to that, I think that would be welcome to be able to be something that the stakeholders can look at during the interim. The other piece that I think gives me some pause here too is that since the hearing, there have been concerns brought up with language about biosimilars and interchangeable biological products in here. And again, I'm not going to hold up the bill because of this, but I want to bring up the point that our office has received a lot of input on this. Biosimilars are basically generic biological products. So you have drugs, which are things that we're familiar with, but there are also certain categories of drugs called biologics that are manufactured a little bit differently. And so biosimilars are kind of the equivalent generic term used for biologic drugs compared to normal drugs. And so there are provisions in here that I think, you know, give me some pause, but again, it's something that I think, you know, it either can be studied in the interim as part of inclusion with this letter, or just kind of further discussions that I think need to occur during the interim with regards to biosimilars and interchangeable biological products. So if there's the will to do a letter to look at these issues during the interim, would certainly appreciate that inclusion as well.
Thank you, Senator. And I see a couple of lights. I just wanted to ask a quick question of council, because I too have heard some feedback related to the biosimilars and a desire for there to be some focus. Would we need to put something in the bill to do that?
The question is whether something would need to be put in the bill to address this concern relating to the biosimilars.
Correct. To have some interim work or a deeper
Mhm.
dive into that.
Not for the interim work, no,
Okay.
correct. Yeah,
Thank-
that could be done by letter.
Okay, thank you. I'll go Senator Reedy and then the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess, and if I missed the explanation, I'm sorry, why did the psych drugs come out?
Yeah, so I think the concern was excluding from these step therapy fail first protocols, having a categorical exclusion based on the condition of a patient. And there was some thought that may have some unintended consequences. It may exclude, you know, the use of certain drugs from these protocols. There's some who viewed that it was more appropriate to look at excluding maybe certain categories of medications, but not the condition, you know, that's being treated. So that's my understanding of the rationale for bringing that out of the bill and having that looked at further.
I just agree with, I think, Senator Lamb, that this is one of those things you don't want treatment to be, you really want this is one of the most important ones where you don't want to have to mess around to get where you want to go. So, I mean, obviously I'm not going to hold the bill up. I guess we're not, but I do think a good idea for further commentary in the interim is good.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes,
Vice Chair.
At the beginning of session, I did have the utilization bill with the prior authorization. And we decided not to move on that, and we will have an interim study. So, and I don't know if you wrote a letter, I don't know, but that's my intention. And I think I have the advocates to work for that as well, along with the insurance carriers.
Thank you. Back to Senator Lamb.
Yes. Add to what Senator Reedy was talking about there, I think it's important to note that this is not the first time that a certain class of medication has been carved out, that there's a carve out for metastatic cancer medications too, that for the obvious reasons, you don't want to have to go through fail first therapy when you're trying to treat metastatic cancer. So, you know, I think there is precedent there when it comes to these psychiatric drugs. Obviously, you know, it doesn't seem like we're going to be dealing with it with this bill, but I just want to make sure that that's clear too, that it's, you know, there are other classifications where this is treated a little bit differently. And I think to the point that you were making, this may be one as well that we want to consider to add to that list.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. We have before us Senate Bill 515 with amendments on a reprint. Any further discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
Move favorable.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable on the reprint of Senate Bill 515 with intent through a letter for interim work related to the items that have been lifted up during this discussion. Are there any further questions? All those in favor of Senate Bill 515 as amended, raise your hand. That bill receives a unanimous favorable with amendments. Next bill.
Next bill on the list is Senate Bill 805. This is the bill that requires health insurance carriers and Medicaid to provide coverage for biomarker testing for the purpose of diagnosis, treatment, appropriate management, or ongoing monitoring of a disease or condition that is supported by medical and scientific evidence. Biomarker testing involves the analysis of a patient's tissue, blood, or other biospecimen for the presence of a biomarker, such as a gene or protein that may reveal details about a patient's cancer and aid in targeted treatment. This amendments here that you have before you also are amendments that have been adopted in the House, and I think is the resolution of some discussion that the House sponsor had with the Health Department, particularly with respect to some of the concerns about cost uncertainties to the Medicaid program for the new coverage requirements. And so I'll walk you through what the amendments do. On page 2, it delays to July 1st, 2025, the Medicaid coverage for biomarker testing. So this would push back that coverage requirement to fiscal year 2026. And in the meantime, what the Health Department has indicated that they're doing is that they will be beginning the process of covering this testing with connection to cancer treatment. And so during that process, they're going to be studying the impacts of the expanded coverage with respect to its cost and also access to treatment. And then if you go to page 3 of 5, this is the provision. These are the provisions that relate to health insurance coverage. The testing needs, under the amendments, the testing needs to be used to provide information in connection with treatment or monitoring. So there's some tightening of the circumstances in which the required biomarker testing coverage mandate would attach. On page 4, there is an amendment here that strikes from the coverage requirements testing that's supported by consensus statements that are developed by an independent multidisciplinary panel of experts and aimed at specific clinical circumstances. And then on page 5, there's an amendment that strikes provisions establishing separate utilization review procedures for biomarker testing. And instead, this type of coverage would be subject to the existing timelines for utilization review under Maryland law. And then here at the end with the uncodified language, this is where the Health Department is required to submit a report looking at the fiscal impact for testing, and they'll look at the anticipated fiscal and access impacts of expanding the coverage under the bill, and will submit any legislative changes to the requirements under the bill based on what they're observing through this study. The Healthcare Commission also has to submit a report of the impact on providing this testing coverage. So those are the amendments that were the outcome of some of these discussions.
Okay. Are there any questions or is there any discussion related to Senate Bill 805 as you have it before you? Okay. Seeing no questions, Senator Mounts.
Is there any opposition to this legislation as it's currently before us?
No, there's no opposition to the legislation.
Right. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? I'll entertain a motion. Have a motion from Senator Ellis, a second from the Vice Chair. Any questions? Okay, all you have before you Senate Bill 805 as amended. All those in favor, raise your hand. Seeing no opposition, that bill receives a unanimous favorable report. And that completes our voting list for this morning. Please stay tuned. I'm not sure if we'll be back or need to vote again today, so please stay tuned and pay attention to announcements as they're made. Senator Vital.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to take a second and introduce where'd she go? Alma is a senior at University of Maryland, majoring in communication, and she's been with me all session, and I asked her to join us today just to listen in. So thank you for welcoming her.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Okay. Any further discussion, announcements? All right, that concludes our work for this morning. See you all on the floor.